Yes. All right, so we're going to start today with a bit of a thought experiment. I want you to pretend you have a friend named Phil. Some of you have a friend named Phil. Some of you will have to pretend you have a friend named Phil. It's fine. And he calls you, he's like, hey, man, or hey, sis, or whatever your imaginary friend named Phil would call you. Hey, sir, if that's your... I've got this job opportunity, but it's out in like Colorado, and I just don't know if I should take it. What do you think? And all of a sudden, you're like, okay, I got to give this guy some advice. He called me because I'm so wise, and we got to make this happen. So we think through this. We think, man, what are the questions that you ask when somebody's like, I'm thinking about taking this job? You're like, well, is it close to family? Does that matter to you? How far will you be from family? Is there like ample time off to fly back to the East Coast and spend holidays and things with family, or is that too far of a commitment for you for your family? What does it pay? How much are you going to make out of this job in Colorado? Is it enough to support your life that you want to live out in Colorado and prepare for your future? And you start thinking about like, no, that really matters. Is it work that you'll enjoy? Thinking like, wow, is this actually something that I would like to be doing with my life for the 40 or 60 hours a week that this job is going to take? There's another really good question, right? Like, how many hours a week are you going to be working? Are you going to get to actually enjoy Colorado because it's beautiful? Are you going to be able to enjoy it, or are you going to be like just working all the time? Is it that kind of thing? Is it work you'd be proud to do? Well, there's a more interesting question. More than just like enjoy it. Are you sort of going to find some like pride in the work that you're doing, or do you feel like God says yes to this? What do you think God thinks about this job? That's really interesting, isn't it, to think about what maybe God would think about taking this job or not taking this job. And there's a lot of different questions we have when we think about, man, taking this job, not taking this job. And then as a bystander looking at somebody and saying, wow, you can either do this or not do this, and we can sort of like give them a pretty easy like linear breakdown of the things that should like influence those choices. But any of you ever like have to make one of these choices and you think like, man, logically I can do this list, but then it's like, I don't know if that fits though. Anyways, I'm just going to do the other thing. That's like maybe common for me. I don't know why, I just feel like I'm supposed to do this thing, and that's super interesting. Anyway, so then maybe your friend Jill calls you the next day, and you're like, wow. And Jill's like, hey, so I've been sort of like casually dating this guy, and he wants to like make it official and put it on our Facebook and post something on our Instagram, and he wants to get like shirts and stuff, or whatever you, whatever it is you kids do these days. And you're like, wow, I'm actually I must be like a really great friend. All these people want my advice all the time in my made-up world. And but then you start asking a different set of questions for Jill, right? So you think maybe Jill, well, is he nice? Is he funny? Like these things that literally anyone you ask, well, you should be like really nice, you should be funny, and is he handsome? Like, do you think he's like attractive? Do you think does he have like a stable job? Is he able to provide for you? And you start to think about like, well, what about like this big life decision? There's like a set of questions that you try to like see those things through as well, right? So we see like, is he going to be good for you at the end of this relationship? Is your life like in the middle of like, does this make your life better? Does this job make your life better? And what we realize is these like sets of questions that we sort of ask are actually rooted somewhere deeper in this sort of idea that we have about what makes a life good. And so for some people, that may be, you ask them how much you make, and they say, well, I don't care how much I'm going to make. I get to go do this. I get to go help be at the ground floor of this startup tech company, and it's everything I've ever wanted. I don't care if I eat peanuts and sleep in the park. I get to be a part of this thing. And you're like, well, you have a different definition than some of us about what it means to live a good life. And why some people were like, why do you care how much money he makes? Well, some people have a different view of what it means to have a good life. And maybe that's a part of it. I'm not saying whether it should or shouldn't be. Really, that's what we're exploring here with More Than Flesh and Bone. Is there a story about humanity that runs deeper than all the rest of these things, that is the place that we should be living our life from? And is there a definition outside of our sort of subjective desires of what a good life actually is? I wouldn't ask that question if I didn't believe that the Bible gives us a really great framework for that. Before we get into the framework, I want to ask this question. What if you get it wrong? What if you spend your life living from an idea of what I believe will give me this good life, and at the end of life I'll be proud of, and you turn around and realize, oh, that was not what I thought that was going to be. We hear the story sort of all the time, this young, ambitious person who wants to make all this money and become this billionaire, and they sort of like sacrifice their family to the long hours of whatever business they're in the middle of, and they look back and their kids don't know them, and they don't really have a relationship with their wife. Maybe their wife has like left them and they like hardly notice. There's this sort of like, well, they had this idea that this good life was on the other side of making a lot of money, and that it would somehow make them happy. They were living from a story that was like untrue. They're disillusioned with a ton of money and no happiness. Because even happiness is the goal, right? Maybe not. So, and then maybe your thinking was, man, if I can just like get married, or if we just have this many kids, or if I get this right job, or whatever that thing is that is in our hearts that we say, man, that will give me then this life that makes me happy. Or I can turn at the end and say, this was a good life. It was hard. It was painful at times, but it was good. And man, there's so many different narratives around what that should look like, and I think inside of following Jesus, there's a pretty wide lane there of different kinds of lives based on like the kind of person that God made you to be, that will be fulfilling and can make you happy and closer to Jesus. Really, that's the point. Make other people look at Jesus because of your life, and that what I want to talk to you about for the next 4 weeks is maybe the kind of life that maybe 4 qualities of being human that we all have in common. And so outside of the things that we're gifted in and the individual way God has made you, he's made us all human. And there's these 4 kind of things that I want to touch on. Maybe there's more I haven't, but these are the 4 that I think are important to us that we pulled out of the book of Genesis. And so today we're going to talk about what it means to live, what it means to be human, and what it means to live, to be alive. Interestingly, there's this moment in time when you'll be talking to somebody and they'll be like, man, it was my birthday and I just did it. We just went to the place and we jumped out of the plane. And I've never felt that alive. Whoa, that's like a loaded statement, right? I don't know that like people like realize it when we say something like that, or like, man, I was in the car and we were driving and we just, I was going really, I've never felt that alive, or whatever those things are that like, I felt alive for the first time, or I saw her and it was like I was living for the first time. Or she held my hand and my heart stopped. I almost died. And it's as if we kind of know that there's a more life. A life that's more maybe exciting, exhilarating, whatever that is, that there's more to living than kind of like what we're experiencing. And I just thought, as I was thinking about it, that is so crazy that there's living and there's living. In the biblical story, God says that He puts Adam and Eve, and I'm gonna talk about all of that in just a second. But He makes them, He puts them in this garden, and He gives them one tree that if they eat this, He says you'll surely die. Or actually, it doesn't say they should, whatever. So anyway, so He says if they eat this, now you have to die. And so basically, the idea is like, well, did God lie to them and say, well, they ate this tree, so now they died? But like, well, we're all here. So maybe living doesn't just mean breathing. And that's what I want to talk about today. And we talk about living, is that living is more than breathing. You're more than flesh and bone. God has a life for you. Jesus said this, He said, I came that you would have life and have it abundantly. Which, as far as like a medical definition of having life, basically there's not like degrees of this, right? You're just either alive or you're like not. You either have breath or you don't. It's not like there's not like 3 stages of this where you like are dead, you are alive, or you're like very alive. But Jesus is saying He's only mostly dead. Jesus is saying, that's a bad movie reference. Most of you won't. Princess Bride, okay. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing it. All right, so anyways, Jesus' definition of life is something other than just breathing. So I want to explore a little bit about what that is and what makes us more than flesh and bone. And to do that, let's open up to Genesis chapter 1. We'll start in the very beginning, a very good place to start. God has created all of the earth, the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars. He's created little creepy, crawly creatures that scurry around on the ground, and He's filled the oceans, and He's made aardvarks and things to eat the things that scurry along on the ground. Praise God. And then God said this, He said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along on the ground, which is why I get to decide which bugs go in my house. So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. We think about the story that the world tells about being human. Specifically in our culture now, we put a very high value on what we can see, what we can touch, and if we can't measure it, if we can't see it, then it can't possibly be sort of real. And so the idea that God exists in a realm that's non-physical, we can't see it, we can't touch it, we don't have one of our 5 senses to be like, oh, that's it, I hear God, or I felt Him. In that sense, it makes belief really difficult, in a sense, and that's kind of a story about what it means to be human, kind of in our day and age. And I think about, well, then, what does that play out to? What does that really mean? It's just kind of like try to be a good person. Just try to do the best you can. make a good life, have a nice thing happening for yourself, be good to people. Don't mess with anybody else's thing, so don't steal from them or whatever. But what you want to do with your own self is all good, and you're basically just space dust. And in a minute, you're going to be space dust again, so might as well enjoy the time in between the space dust. And I get that that's a little bit of a caricature or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's sort of this sort of trying to pull meaning out of that and pull a life out of that sort of story. But when you say it like that, there's something in me that just kind of goes, I don't know, I don't like that. And I wonder where that came from. Where does that reaction to that come from? Because there's another story that the Bible tells, and it's radically different. Rather than being like this sort of result of a random act of the universe, there's a God who, go back to verse 26 here, a God that says, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. And so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. There's something about, there's this law of biblical interpretation we love, and it's called the law of first mention. So the first time something gets mentioned in the scriptures, it's kind of understood that this is the definition of that thing. So like if I were to use a word you didn't know, I would use it in a context that gave it a ton of understanding so you would understand what it means. And so this is, in the biblical story, the first time we see human beings. First time we see mankind. And so what God is doing is he's saying, this is what that is. This is what it is to be human. It is to be made in the image of God, and in the image of God, he created him. So whenever you see also then in the Bible, a phrase repeated, or an idea repeated, like right in a row, they didn't have highlighters. They didn't have bold typeface. They didn't have any kind of a way of underlining anything as they were writing these things, so they would just write it twice. They would say, this is important, this is really important. And so we would say this is for a matter of emphasis. And so what the Bible's telling us here is that God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, meaning this is important, this is very important, that to separate humans from the image of God is like really a problem. So, because it takes all of what we were made for and made to do out of us, and we're left now searching and scraping for meaning. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? First of all, we have a sense of right and wrong, sense of morality, which is very interesting. I think about maybe a tiger. I follow this Instagram account. It's super awesome. It's like African Photos Stream or something. I don't remember what it is. But they have all of these photos of like really cool things happening in Africa, but it's all animals. And so I saw one this week. It's a little bit gruesome, but it was really going to get my point across. There's a lion cub who is kind of like poking his way out of a wildebeest carcass. So he's like covered in blood, and he'd been like eating in there, and he's like on his way out of like a hole in this wildebeest carcass. And nobody would look at that and be like, well, I get that he's supposed to eat the wildebeest, but like it is a sin for that guy to be in there and just sort of like or like even like there's any kind of like moral decision about that at all. He was just like eating and playing is what lion cubs do. There's no, right? There's no like, it's not like amoral for a lion cub to, see what I mean? As you guys are grossed out by that? It was really a gross photo, but I was like, but the lion cub is super cute, so it's a little confusing. You're like, I get it. Also gross. It's not like right or wrong for, you know what I mean? It's not like inhumane, like See, this is interesting, right? We say humane. We say things are like humane or inhumane punishment. These are things that would be human, or that goes beyond being human into like animal realm. We have a sense of morality, and that's been given to us by God. We have love. You know what that is? We get the definition wrong a lot, but we like it when we see it. Isn't it interesting? We pull for people in positions that we have no understanding. You watch a Facebook video, this makes me cry all the time. This is one of the weird things. I don't cry often, but if I see a Facebook video of like a dad and a son being reunited or something, or sometimes they'll like fly military guys or girls home soon, and they'll like, it'll be like a sneaky thing, and all of a sudden they'll realize it's their dad, and I just lose it. I don't know these people. I don't have any concept for that really. I'm never, not in the, but I'm just like losing it. I'm like, why? We have this understanding of like sort of what it means to be God. These like things that God is: love, justice, mercy, even this idea of reconciliation or bringing together. This is like, these things are part of us. More than just a social understanding, or more than just an evolutionary thing. Because if anything, that kind of thing is not good for my family, to be looking out for your family. Can you imagine if this Pride of Lions was like, oh, we can't hunt there because that's where the other guys eat, so we're going to starve over here and let them sort of live. But we celebrate that kind of thing. Self-sacrifice, that's not good survival instinct, but that is a Jesus thing. And it's put in there. We were made in the image of God. We have emotion. We have a will. I think of Piper. She's just everything is reaction. Piper's our dog. She's like 40 pounds, and she's very reactionary. So you knock on the door. Piper loses her marbles. And it's every single time. She doesn't make a decision to, I'm going to go to, it's just stimulus, response. Humans are different. We have stimulus, decision, response. That makes us interesting. That makes us different. God also has that. We're made in the image of God. We're creative. We find beauty in things. We love to be creative. We don't look at the sunset and just see a sunset. We see beauty. We see life. We see that we desire to also create. We're going to spend all of our time 2 weeks from now talking about work and creativity and how they're kind of they're built and they're part of our humanity. And I'm very excited about it. And it's something we get from God. We were made in the image of God. Sorry, a bit parched. And then I got to thinking, why make an image? If God is building human beings, why make an image? Why make people that at all to look like you and to be like you? And it seems to cause him a lot of heartache, and it's been a tough process for all of us. Like, why do this? And I think it's because an image is just a representation. You think of, you see a lot of pictures. This was a moment for me. We went to Europe a couple years ago, and we were in England, we were in London, and I'm not a huge tourist guy. I kind of feel like if I've seen a picture of it, or before this moment, I'd kind of seen like, if I'd seen a picture of it, I kind of like know what it's about, whatever. But we got out of the subway, the tube, that's what they say, the tube. We got out of the subway, and we get up, and you get out right at Big Ben, which is this massive clock there. It's under construction right now, and it's connected to Parliament. The whole thing is like breathtaking. The picture looks kind of cool, but when you get in front of it, you're like, oh my gosh. The image was like just enough to make me want to go there and to experience it myself. And that's sort of what we are at our very, very best, is we're an image of God. We're the representation of God. The word here, I believe I'm saying this right. Don't hate me. The word, the Hebrew word here is tselem. Tselem, I think, maybe better. I'm getting the nod from the Hebrew scholars. And it just means image, or it's often translated as idol. And so when the pagan people would set up an image to their God, they'd be setting up an idol to their God, and it'd be the one that represents their God. And that's so, at the very, very beginning, we see the legitimate idol, the legitimate image is the living, breathing people of God. That's incredible to me. And I'm just sitting here even like, whew. We represent the King of Kings because we're made like him, we think like him, and there's something of him that is inside of us. Let's go to, as the band comes up, I want to go to Genesis 2, chapter 7. Genesis 2, chapter 7. How about Genesis 2, verse 7? Chapter 2, verse 7, he says, Genesis 1 is the story of creation. Genesis 2 tells it again in a different way. And so we're here back to that same spot we were at in Genesis 1. The retelling in Genesis 2 says this: Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. And God spoke creation forward. He said, let there be light, and there was light. He said, let the earth be separated from the waters, and it happened. And when it comes time to forming man, he stoops down to the ground, and with his hands out of the dust and the dirt, he creates him. It says he breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. I think it's such a beautiful picture. It's the reality of the life that we're living. With his hands, not his voice, he stoops down and crafts an image of himself. And he breathes into Adam, becomes a living person. Earlier we said that living is more than breathing. And in one sense, living is only breathing. It's breath of life to the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. See, every single breath that we take is a gift from God. The life that we live has been breathed into us from God. That makes your existence holy. It makes your existence precious, invaluable. You've been entrusted with the divine image. You've been trusted with the divine breath. It means not every breath is not just a gift, but every single breath is the presence of God. Everything else we're going to talk about, what it means to live, is to experience the presence of God. In the face of my wife, in the face of my son. Sitting at a stoplight. All of life is holy, all of life is sacred, because all of life is experiencing the presence of God. He's even in our breath. This is one of my favorite moments in the story of humanity, is right at the beginning, is the design for us was to be an image of God, filled with the very presence of God. With every single breath. We'd see that through Jesus, all things were created. And we'd see through Jesus that all things are sustained. So as we connect with God and what it means to live, I think it's here. I think it's breathing. The breath of God. What would happen to a human if you separated them from breath? Die. That's what happened in the garden. We were separated from God. Each of us as well, separated from God. Jesus came that we should be reconciled. and able to breathe again. We call it a new life. Presence of God within us. The Spirit, the wind, living with us again. We think about what it means to be more than flesh and bone, what it means to be human, to carry the breath, the image of God. Amen. Amen. Let's stand.